Hi, and welcome to episode 13 of the Western Canon Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Alexander Hill, and today we'll be talking about the trial and death of Socrates. Welcome back. I'm excited to be back myself. Just for listeners out there who don't know, I took an extended break from the podcast to do some writing. I wrote 4 or 5 articles and published at various outlets just to kind of get my name out there. And I also spent the last year and a half writing a fantasy novel. I'm about 90% of the way done with that novel. So the time, it turned out, was definitely worth it. And I'll let you know if anything comes of that novel. I've been working really hard on it. I'm actually writing it with my wife, and it explores many of the themes that we've been talking about on this show. So in many interesting ways, it's going to be a kind of philosophical fantasy novel with a kind of Nietzschean supervillain and a kind of Plato's Republic regime as well. So that should be pretty interesting for those of you who like fantasy. And maybe at some point we'll read a chapter of that on this podcast. I'll probably be finished with it this summer, and then I'll be looking for an agent to sell it to one of those major publishing houses if they'll have me. We'll see. So I just wanted to start off by saying that for those of you who stuck with me and stayed subscribed to this channel, I really do appreciate it. I'm excited to continue making content for you. So okay, let's get into it. Today we're going to be talking about Plato primarily, and also through Plato, his great figure Socrates. And specifically, we'll be looking at the great dialogues of Plato, the Euthyphro, the Apology, and the Crito today. I know there are other dialogues, but those are the ones I'll be discussing today. In another episode, I'll likely discuss Plato's Symposium, so look out for that as well. I just figured I would cover today those Platonic dialogues the Socratic dialogues that discuss the trial and death of Socrates, a really important moment in the history of philosophy. So let's get started. Socrates is the first philosopher to deal at a deeper level with the mind and the psychology of man, of the soul and of the good life, honor, virtue, morality, patriotism, the self. Not so much the nature of the physical world, like many of those earlier pre-Socratic philosophers, like Thales of Miletus or Democritus or something like that. Not so much the nature of the physical world, but questions like, what is the best state? Should I follow laws even if they're immoral? This was the perfect time in ancient Athens to study morals, because there was a whole new generation of young men questioning, what is the point of doing good? What's wrong with doing what one wants so long as one is not breaking the laws? Is there such a thing as natural morality? And I think that young men are still asking themselves that question today. We need Plato. That is, we need the spirit of Socrates now, I would say, more than ever. I'd like to start by grounding the philosopher Plato in the larger Western tradition so that we can get a contextual understanding of where Plato is situated in sort of the great conversation of history. There's a great book about Plato and Aristotle. It's called The Cave in the Light, Plato versus Aristotle and the Struggle for the Soul of Western Civilization. It's by Arthur Herman, who has written many excellent books. One of my other favorites is he wrote a book on the Scottish Enlightenment. The Cave in the Light argues that Plato and Aristotle are at the heart, at the center of what has basically been a 2,000-year struggle for the soul of Western civilization, which today obviously extends to all civilizations. We really get to know Plato's thought in many ways through his allegory of the cave, which he tells in Book 7 of the Republic. Plato used this allegory to communicate an idea that was of central importance to his philosophy, that man is destined by his Creator to find a path from the dark cave of material existence to the light of a higher, purer, and more spiritual truth. Plato then, in this light, is seen as an advocate of a kind of religious metaphysics. Metaphysics, if you've never taken a philosophy course before, means beyond what we can see in the physe, in the physical world. So it's things that aren't empirically discernible through our senses, things that go beyond the material world. Now, Plato inherited a religious metaphysics in the system of Greek gods, the pantheon of Olympian gods, but he changes this scheme, the scheme that was handed down to him. He didn't like the idea of these fickle, immoral gods that were up there doing bad things and toying with mortals. So he establishes the idea that there are these moral gods up there. But Plato is also known for his own religious metaphysics. For Plato, our entire material, tangible, experiential world is but a poor second-rate imitation of an ideal world, an eternal world, an unchanging world with a sort of templates of everything. He called them the ideas or the forms, where these templates exist. What a beautiful idea. And this idea, in part, is an attempt to deal with the fact that we as human beings, we can think about abstractions. We can think about a concept like beauty. Our minds can actually create a world of ideas, right? There are so many things about us that are not physical, right? An abstraction like love, right? Our memories, you can't touch your memory. Your memory is not a physical thing. Your thoughts, you have thoughts. Your thoughts are part of who you are. But you can't touch those things. So there is a world of ideas in a sense. But as Edith Hall pointed out in the last couple episodes back of the show, that doesn't mean that the world of ideas is superior to the world we live in now. And that was Aristotle's point. That's where Aristotle comes in. Plato then was a kind of mystic, a transcendentalist, someone who believes that reality is a mere representation or copy of the ideal, true form of things. You'll remember going back to episode 9 of this podcast when we interviewed Hillsdale professor Nathan Schluter. We talked at length about Plato's allegory of the cave, which is told in Book 7 of the Republic. The allegory of the cave, of course, can be seen through several different lenses. In one sense, it's a meditation on education, right? Coming out of the cave and into the light of knowledge. In one sense, it is an allegory that can teach us about epistemology, metaphysics, politics, right? So it's really a versatile metaphor. But behind Plato's thought is really an enduring paradigm, namely that it's when we rise above the merely human and enter the realm of the everlasting and immortal and changeless that we truly achieve wisdom. And that there is a quote from Arthur Herman's book, The Cave in the Light. Aristotle famously disagreed with this formulation. He argued this in his Physics. All things have a specific nature based on a union of form and matter. Instead of trying to rise above mundane reality, Aristotle believed that the philosopher's job was to explain how the world works and how as human beings we can find our proper place in it. There is no cave, only a world made of things and facts. For Aristotle, Plato's type of thought really denigrates studies of the real world, studies of actual matter. For Aristotle, Plato's metaphysics is an attempt to evade the problems of the real world, the problems of this life. Plato had his head in the clouds compared to someone like Aristotle. For Plato, what matters is the morality of what he thought of as the real world of the eternal forms, which is superior to the sensory world, the world of the shadows on the cave wall. For Plato, the material, physical, sensory world of matter supervenes, you might say, on the world of the forms. Whereas for Aristotle, and here I'll play a little clip from Edith Hall, this is what the classicist Edith Hall had to say about the matter.
Aristotle simply said no. And a couple of times, he's not usually dismissive of Plato or funny. It's not how he writes. But a couple of times you can hear the impatience. It's just like, why are we putting this world nobody can see, and we don't even know exists, ahead of the beauty and the wonder and the miraculous granular detail of our mortal lives. And he didn't really believe in life after death at all. So that's why he embraced things like biology, zoology, study of volcanoes, study of weather, study of physics, study of everything, as well as the human animal, who he treats quite biologically at first and then gradually says, well, ethics is part of the human telos. So my joking summary of that for my students is this: I am very short-sighted indeed. I have incredibly strong contact lenses in. I cannot see my own kitchen table, okay, if I don't put my contact lenses in or my glasses on.
Right.
So I have got a very clear set of forms of things in my head, like tables and things I've created in the world. And I would like to talk to a blind person about that. You know, what is their inside of their heads like? And I like to think that Plato was extremely short-sighted. He came from a military family. He should really have gone off and been a great general. He did become a wrestler, but you could do that one short-sighted, couldn't you? You could wrestle short-sighted.
Yes.
It's not like being a javelin thrower
Right.
or something. Aristotle, however, we know had 20/20 vision. Okay, bear with me on this. We know that because he is the first person ever in history to have recorded that he saw the moon pass in front of the planet Mars. Now, you can't see that in a world without telescopes, without very good eyesight. And from that, he infers the moon is closer to us than Mars, which was entirely correct. He did that in 357 BCE, when he was had just gone out from the academy as a student and was sitting in the taverna with his mates, and he saw it. Now, I think Aristotle had perfect eyesight. And so he didn't need a world of forms because of the glory of the world that he saw about him. And actually his visual descriptions of things are exceptional. You know, he knew how to make you thrilled by a plant or an animal or a mountain or a star. And so that is how I explain the difference.
All right, excellent stuff. So Aristotle then is the father of modern science, of logic, and of technology, while Plato becomes the muse of all that is transcendental. He is the spokesman for the theologian, the mystic, the poet, the artist. Plato and Aristotle, according to Cicero, serve as the, quote, twin foundation heads of Western reason, intellectual co-equals who sum up the entire scope of human knowledge. And this actually is the central thesis of Hermann's book, The Cave in the Light. And you can really see this in Raphael's Sanza della Senatura with its centerpiece, The School of Athens. I'm sure many of you have seen this painting before. It's a famous painting. And if you haven't, I'll actually make this the image for the YouTube video. I know many of you just listen, but if you want to take a look at that painting, I've made it the actual image of this podcast episode. The School of Athens, says Arthur Hermann, quote, not only sums up the legacy of Plato and Aristotle as the progenitors of ancient philosophy and Western thought, it also captures the dual character of Western culture. In the center, the focal point of the painting, you see Plato on the left, walking with Aristotle on the right, and the two men are arguing over philosophy. On the one side, you can see Plato holding the Timaeus, which is a favorite dialogue of mystics, religious philosophers, artists, occultists. Plato, moreover, is pointing to the heavens in a gesture that seems to say, this way is truth. On the other side is Aristotle, man of logic, science, and practical reason. Aristotle, on the other hand, is holding his Nicomachean ethics, giving a hand gesture that seems to be deliberately tempering Plato's impulse to look toward the divine, transcendent realm of perfect forms. So while Plato is pointing to the sky, Aristotle is holding his palm down, pressing it firmly toward the ground. Hermann writes about this. He says, quote, mysticism versus common sense, religion versus science, empiricism versus idealism. The School of Athens is in fact an allegorical painting about two contrasting but highly influential worldviews that have shaped our world in a perpetual struggle for the soul of Western civilization. The English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge once said, every person is born either a Platonist or an Aristotelian. In fact, and I'm still quoting Herman here, Platonists and Aristotelians are not born, but made. We are all part of Raphael's School of Athens, standing on one side or the other. With that said, let's get started by looking at Plato. And to understand Plato, you're also going to have to understand his teacher and mentor, Socrates. Okay, so if we're going to understand Plato's early dialogues, we first have to look at the story and death of Socrates, who lived from 470 to 399 BC. The leaders of Athens decided that philosophy was dangerous, and they sought to expel it from their city. Socrates had called the old gods and the old laws into question. He challenged and asked others to challenge the fundamental beliefs upon which their society rested. His aim was to reveal why the philosopher is important and what the philosopher's relationship to the city should be. While a philosopher is potentially subversive to any existing regimes, according to Plato, he's crucial to the life of a just city. Plato wanted to show how philosophy can be vital to a city. The great University of Chicago philosopher Alan Bloom calls The Republic the first work of political science because it invents a political philosophy grounded in the idea of building a city on principles of reason. And so, of course, the time that Plato is living and writing is the golden age of Greece, ruled for a time by Pericles, Athens being the first democracy starting in 5th century BC. Plato lives from 427 to 347 BC. Greece was conquered during Plato's life by a foreigner called Philip II of Macedon in 359. Even then, it was more of a hegemony. Philip's title was hegemon, as he led the Greek forces against Persia. Also, my listeners, I'm sure, know this already, but keep in mind that Socrates was Plato's teacher. Plato was Aristotle's teacher, and Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. So that's such a fascinating lineage there that I thought I'd mention it. Many people don't know this, but some of Plato's first philosophical works, the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, and then later the Phaedo, are all about the trial and death of Socrates. Plato uses this event as an almost allegorical example, although the example wasn't quite allegorical because it happened and certainly could happen to any gadfly, any martyr who should threaten the Athenian government. But certainly Plato used this story and his own telling of it as a vehicle to communicate Socrates' philosophy and to show the public why it was important to keep so-called Socratic debate alive. And so Plato uses Socrates as his spokesperson in all of his books, actually, and that's why it isn't always clear whose ideas are being presented at any one time. Many scholars believe that the early dialogues are kind of a straightforward, accurate account of Socrates' view, and that the middle and later works begin to become Plato's own thinking. Now, I should stop here and note that no one knows the exact order Plato's dialogues were written in, nor do we know the extent to which some might have been later revised and rewritten. The works are usually grouped into the early, middle, and late periods, although factors like chronology were not really a consideration in ancient times in the same way that they are today. That said, there are meaningful distinctions between the different dialogues. For example, the ones classified as the early dialogues often conclude in aporia. In philosophy, aporia is like a philosophical puzzle or some kind of paradoxical impasse that arises as a consequence of inconsistent premises. So Plato's early works often examine insoluble philosophical dilemmas through the person of Socrates. And this is why his early dialogues are often called aporetic, because in them Socrates is questioning his interlocutor about the nature or definition of concepts that are really quite inscrutable. When Socrates would debate someone, he would want to make sure that when his opponent used words, there was great clarity. And so much of Socrates' energy in debates was basically just his attempt to get people to clarify their terms. Okay, Socrates would say, so you just used the word virtue. What does that mean? Or you say that the most important attribute of a warrior is courage. What does courage mean? This is called the Socratic Method. It's a method that includes elentic testing, reductio ad absurdum, and other tricks designed to get your opponent to clarify his thinking and define his terms to the point that he becomes befuddled. The whole point of the Socratic method is to show that your interlocutor's answer, his definition of the thing that you're both arguing about, is unsatisfactory or inconsistent. And the result of this, if you're successful, is that your opponent has to then admit that he is in aporia about the examined concept, concluding in the end that he doesn't know what it is and that he hasn't thought deeply enough about the matter. I just want to say, Socratic debate is such an excellent way of debating. What you tend to see in debates is two people debating something, let's say it's healthcare or something like that, and both people are putting forward their confident arguments, their strident, confident positions, right? And so what you have is a back and forth where both people are putting forth very confident views of the world and very confident philosophies, but no one's really questioning or checking on the other's premises. So you have two people kind of talking past each other with their vision of the world. Whereas what Socrates would do is he would not put forth his own view. He would ask the person he was debating to define their terms. Excuse me, what do you mean by free healthcare? What does free mean? What does healthcare include? What is health? And Socrates would find that the longer he debated the person, the more he narrowed down and defined his opponent's terms, the more he questioned, innocently, honestly questioned his opponent's views, the more their argument began to fall apart, because it was clear that they weren't thinking about the foundational axioms of their belief system. So before we get to those dialogues, the Euthyphro, the Apology, and the Crito, why don't we just look a little closer at the Socratic method? Basically, the Socratic method goes like this, if you ever want to use it on your friends. And I'm teaching you this because the Socratic method is a really easy way to win a debate. You don't really even have to know anything. You just need to know how to reason well, how to ask good questions, how to identify what your opponent's argument hinges on, and then kind of question that. And so I would break it into 5 steps if you want to learn how to do this. Here's what you do. Step 1, you walk up to a person and you begin a conversation with them. And then you try to steer the conversation toward an issue of philosophical significance. Step number 2, you then isolate a key term on which the discussion hinges, or you identify some slippery concept that needs clarification. Thus you pose the question, what is X? In Socrates' case, what he would do is he would complain that he's ignorant and confused about the issue. In other words, he'd play dumb and basically beg the help of his companion to clear up the matter. This would feed the arrogance and the smugness of his companion, and the person would then say, "Oh, let me teach you," and they would confidently and carelessly put forth a definition of X. So part of this is attitudinal. Part of this is Socrates would go up to the person. He would seem well-meaning. He would, oftentimes I've actually given people this advice when you're in one of those really kind of crazy diversity trainings that you have to attend for your work, or whether you're a teacher, you're working at a school, you have to attend some diversity training where this person is basically spouting some ideology at you. Oftentimes, if you challenge them and rip apart their worldview, you're going to alienate your colleagues, and your colleagues are then going to want to take the activist's side, the diversity trainer's side. Oftentimes, the best thing to do is play innocent and play Socrates and ask the person to define their terms. And I know this strategy has worked for a lot of people, because then the audience sees you as someone who's well-meaning, earnest, a person of goodwill, who's just asking important questions. And oftentimes what you'll see is that the person you're arguing with, the person that can't define their terms, will get frustrated and angry and lose their cool. And then everyone else will take your side. And they'll also realize that the person who's up there spouting this ideology about education or about workplace harmony or something like that, where the person's really just spouting some toxic ideology that pits people against one another, everyone else will see that that person really doesn't know what they're talking about. And so this can be a really good way of handling those situations, is just playing Socrates, right? So Socrates would play dumb, he would play innocent, he would say, "I'm really confused about this. I don't understand what you mean by that," you know? So then Socrates would thank his companion for his assistance. Thank you very much for clarifying that, but I just need one or two more points clarified regarding the definition you put forth. And then this would lead to an intense examination of the definition and the discovery that it indeed is inadequate. And this is where you can use reductio ad absurdum. Reductio ad absurdum works like this. You assume your opponent's position to be true. So you listen to your opponent and then you pretend that you actually do believe your opponent's claim is true. And obviously, reductio ad absurdum means reducing to an absurdity. So you're reducing your opponent's claim to an absurdity, right? So you're pretending like you agree with it, and then you run with their premise. So you say, what is the definition of X? And they say, well, it's this. And you say, oh, okay, I see. So that would mean X. So that would mean Y. So that would mean Z. And what you do is you try to take their premise and show how it would lead to an absurd conclusion. So you're showing that accepting the truth of your opponent's claim logically implies either an absurd conclusion or one that contradicts itself or other conclusions that are also held by your opponent. So the logical form here, for those of my logic friends out there, is this. First, to do reductio ad absurdum, you assume P is true, right? Let's say the person is a flat earther, right? And they say the earth is flat. And you say, oh, okay, all right, I see what you're saying. So if the earth is flat, then if I walk in one direction a really long ways, eventually I'm going to walk off the edge of this flat earth. And that's reductio ad absurdum, because of course we all know that there's no place where you can actually walk off of the edge of the earth. So you assume that P is true. From this assumption, you deduce that Q is true. Then also you deduce that Q would have to be false because it results in some really absurd conclusions that you both kind of obviously know are absurd. Thus, P implies both Q and not Q. And so you've drawn out a contradiction which is necessarily false. Therefore, P itself must be false, right? The point here is that if you can deduce a clearly false new statement from a proposition, this is definitive proof that the original assumption is false. Here's an example. So Sarah says, all inequality is unjust. And her debate partner, Tim, says, he's using reductio ad absurdum here. He says, oh, all inequality is unjust. Well, I guess then that would mean that a doctor making more than a McDonald's worker is unjust. I guess that's unjust, right? And then Sarah would say, oh, well, that's different. The doctor worked hard and stayed up all night studying, earned a bachelor's degree, then spent 7 years in medical school, then did 2 years of low-paid, intense residency, all while paying off her crippling college debt. And then Tim says, so then you agree. Some forms of inequality are not unjust. And so that's basically what Socrates would do, is he would trap the person. Okay. And oftentimes what happens is the subject, the person you're arguing with, is going to produce a new definition. This will be step number 4 that attempts to improve on the earlier one, leading back to step 4. You can just do it again with the new definition, right? Every time they put forth a definition, because they don't know what they're talking about, their definition is going to fail. And then step 5 is basically that the victim, your victim here in debate, because you've used the Socratic method on them, realizes that he or she doesn't really know what they're talking about. And the dialogue ends either when Socrates' companion finds some excuse to get out of the spotlight, or the two agree that they need to seriously continue their search for a solution. So you're not banging the person over the head with your views. That can alienate them, that can make them, that can turn them against you, that can increase a kind of negative polarization, where the person will then go home and work much harder to try to engage in confirmation bias and overturn your whole worldview, right? If you destroy someone in a debate, oftentimes you think, oh yeah, I've destroyed them, I've really embarrassed them. What they'll actually do is become resentful towards everyone who holds your worldview. They'll go home, they'll spend hours online trying to disprove what you said, and then they'll walk around for the rest of their life with arguing that and very much disliking people who hold your view. Much better to debate someone by using the Socratic method, where you're really testing the premises and taking seriously the argument that your opponent is making, and asking earnest questions in good faith. And so the Socratic method is really a conversational method that that leads both the teacher and the pupil, or the two people who are debating, to answers of greater clarity and refinement, and you're both searching for the truth together. It's not actually meant as a trick to bludgeon someone over the head with. In fact, Plato referred to this method as a dialectic. It was really meant to be a teaching method. And so Socrates really is the ultimate teacher. Instead of being given information, pupils discover their own ignorance, and that then leads them to seek a higher truth, right? It seems that now more than ever we could use such a spirit of rational inquiry in an age of hyper-partisanship and political polarization, in an age of knee-jerk reaction and confirmation bias where everyone is expected to have an instant opinion on every subject. I feel like now more than ever we could benefit from stepping back and asking ourselves whether we really know something for sure. And so that's basically what Socrates did. And you can see this in the early dialogues, which give Plato's account of the trial and death of Socrates. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And we're going to confine our analysis, just for time's sake, to the Euthyphro, the Apology, and the Crito. And the first one I want to mention is Plato's Euthyphro. The Euthyphro is a dialogue that takes place outside of an Athens courthouse, and it's between Euthyphro and Socrates, and they're awaiting preliminary hearings in the weeks before the trial of Socrates, which takes place, as you probably know, in 399 BC. Socrates is about to be condemned to death for impiety and for corrupting the youth, and yet the charming thing about the Euthyphro is that here he is standing outside of the courthouse. We know he is about to be doomed, and yet he still finds a time to discuss the distinction between a morality based on religious belief and one based on philosophical reasoning with his opponent, Euthyphro. Now, this is one of the more famous, enduring dialogues because it presents what we now call in philosophy the Euthyphro dilemma. In the Euthyphro, Socrates argues that it is almost impossible to derive a consistent moral code from the gods because, quote, doing the right thing is different than doing what the gods approve. Interesting. Think about that. Let's back up and go through the dialogue itself first. So what happens in this dialogue is that Socrates encounters Euthyphro outside of the court of Athens. Socrates has been called to court on charges of impiety by Miletus, and Euthyphro himself has come to prosecute his own father for having unintentionally killed a murderous hired hand, which just shows you the state of Athens at that time and what young men were up to at the time, ratting out their fathers. So when Socrates encounters Euthyphro, he starts out by kind of flattering him, also kind of in an underhanded way, saying that Euthyphro must be a great expert in religious matters, seeing that he is willing to prosecute his own father on such questionable of charges. Only a really wise person could feel that they have the moral authority to prosecute their own father. And Euthyphro says he does indeed know all there is to be known about what is holy. So Socrates urges Euthyphro to instruct him. So he is using the Socratic method. Teach me what holiness is. And maybe that could help me in my own trial if you would expound upon expound upon your knowledge of all that is holy and what is the right thing to do. Okay, Euthyphro says, here it is. Holiness, says Euthyphro, is the action of persecuting religious offenders. That's what holiness is. That's what holy people do. But Socrates says, hey man, this definition is incomplete. There are many holy deeds aside from that of persecuting offenders. And then he asks Euthyphro to give him a general definition that identifies that one feature that all holy deeds then share in common. Okay, so what is one thing that makes a holy deed that all holy deeds share in common? Euthyphro says, what is holy is what is agreeable to the gods. That's his definition. And then Socrates points out, hold on a second. The gods often quarrel. Okay, so what is agreeable to one might not be agreeable to all. So eventually, Euthyphro defines holiness as that which is approved of by all the gods, or as he puts it, quote, piety is that which is dear to the gods, and impiety is that which is not dear to them. And I'm quoting from the free MIT edition of this dialogue that you can find online. But you can see Socrates already beginning to clarify terms, beginning to wear down his opponent. One of my favorite lines from the Euthyphro is this one, and I think this really gets to the crux of the Euthyphro dilemma. And Plato writes, quote, what is morally right is not necessarily always pious. Religion is lovable because it is loved, whereas morality is loved because it is lovable. Okay, that's a really profound thought. Let's think about that for a moment. What does that mean? To say that religion is lovable because it is loved, whereas morality is loved because it is actually lovable. So this sets us up to grapple with the Euthyphro dilemma. This is a really deep question, which I would imagine resonates with many religious believers today. Plato's famous question here is to ask whether a thing is good because God says it's good, or does God say it's good because it really is good, because it's actually good already, and because God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all good, and that because of that he would know what indeed happens to be objectively good. Okay, so the problem this question raises is twofold. First, if a thing is good simply because God says it is. So the problem this question raises is twofold. First, if a thing is good simply because God says it is, then it seems God could say anything was good, and it would be. This includes things we instinctively know to be evil, like rape or murder. If God says those things are good, and if things are good because simply God says they're good, then even things like rape or murder could be good if God just declares it to be so. However, on the other hand, and this is the question at the heart of the Euthyphro dilemma, if God is simply reporting on a thing's goodness, if they're already good and he's just reporting that to be the case, then in this case, he's no longer the standard for goodness and seems to be at the mercy of some outside higher standard. In other words, there's already some objective standard that God himself has to obey, and God in this case is just acknowledging the fact that certain things outside of his control are objectively good. But we don't want there to be a standard above God that he must bow to, right? So we have a problem here, right? If things are good because God says they are, and so that God says things and saying it makes them good, then things like rape or murder, as soon as God says they're good, they're instantly good. That seems to be a huge problem. But if that's not the case, and there is an objective good that God simply knows because he's all-knowing, then God is no longer the standard of human goodness. There is a real objective standard of morality that God then didn't invent. This is an extremely important question, and I have to say, I think it's not only important for religious people, but it's important even for secular people who want to understand morality and aesthetics. That is to say, when we say that a culture is a good one, what is it that makes it good? Is it good because it really is good by some objective metric? Or is it good because people say it's good? Because, to quote Hamlet, there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. When we say that a way of living is good, what is it that makes that behavior good? Is the behavior good because there's some objective standard of rightness or wrongness that we've grasped, and then we channel our efforts towards bringing our behavior in line with that standard of behavior? Or should we be moral relativists and just say that good behavior is whatever people living in a particular culture at a particular place in time say good behavior is? If the former is the case, then at least we can say there are objective moral truths. But how do we know we have found them? How do we know what they are? How do we know that we've correctly deduced them? If the latter, moral relativism, is true, and good is whatever a particular culture or popular culture says is good, then we run into the same quandary, which is that people can literally say anything is good, as long as the mob, as long as the majority, as long as the culture at large thinks something is good. Well, that then makes it good. Even things that we know are wrong, like rape or murder. And you see this. You see an entire culture in the antebellum South saying that slavery is moral. The fact that they thought it was moral at the time didn't make it moral. We know now that holding human beings in slavery, as holding them as property, is immoral. The fact that people thought it to be the case at the time didn't make it so. We can even bring this into the realm of aesthetics. When we say that a painting or a work of literature or a film or a fine wine is good, what makes it good? Are we reasoning beings that can apply rational principles as well as our trained faculties of taste to judge the real external features, the aesthetic qualities that works of art have? Or are those things good because just a bunch of experts, a bunch of people say they're good, right? Now, if you've listened to the show for more than a couple of episodes, you'll know that I am an aesthetic and moral realist. I know this puts me in the minority today, but being a moral and aesthetic realist means that I think morality and ethics are objective facts. I think there are moral and aesthetic truths. In other words, when I say that The Godfather 2 is a great film, I mean that the reason I am saying it is a great film is not because everyone says it is, not because Rotten Tomatoes gave it a good score, but because it actually is a great film. It has the qualities that make it a great film, independent of my saying so. And I've used my reasoning mind and my faculties of taste to recognize that already existing fact and to hold the actual qualities, the features of that film up to scrutiny. Then I use criteria of judgment and aesthetic standards based on rational principles to determine that the qualities that the film has, the way it's made, the acting, the story, the cinematography, the lighting, the sound quality, the writing, the emotional resonance, the directing, those things are done to such a degree that all of those things put together make it a great film. And we have standards for each of those domains. There is something that it means to be a good director, to direct a film well. There is such a thing as a tight plot, a plot that works, a plot that is emotionally satisfying. There is such a thing as excellent cinematography, such that you would want to hire this cinematographer over here over that one, this cameraman over here over that one. The fact that stealing is bad, in other words, or that this 1947 Cheval Blanc is a finer wine than this $6 bottle of cold duck, or that Shakespeare is a better writer than Christopher Marlowe, these may not be truths of the natural sciences, right? So we can distinguish between different types of truths. But these judgments still correspond to truths nonetheless. To make authoritative judgments, to have taste, we have to focus on the elements present within aesthetic objects. And we have to have a set of aesthetic or moral standards based on rational principles that align with the basics of our human nature. Now, again, these judgments correspond to truths, saying that this wine is better than that wine, Shakespeare is a better writer than Christopher Marlowe, stealing is bad. These judgments correspond to a truth, but they're not a priori truths like 2 + 2 = 4. So the fact that stealing is morally wrong is not true in the same way that 2 + 2 = 4 is true. The fact that Monet was a great painter, okay, is not a truth of the natural sciences, like copper is a better conductor of electricity than is aluminum, or the Earth is the third planet from the sun. No, I argue that moral and aesthetic truths are anthropocentric truths. That is, truths that are true because of the kinds of creatures we are and because of the ways we interact with each other. Were our natures other than they actually are, maybe those anthropocentric facts would change. In fact, they would no longer be anthro because we would have evolved beyond our nature or something like that. As NYU psychologist Jonathan Haidt writes, Facts of chemistry, physics, and hard sciences are non-anthropocentric. They do not depend on any aspect of human nature. If intelligent aliens had come to visit the Earth long before humans ever appeared, they would have found that the Earth is the third planet from the sun and that copper is a better conductor of electricity than is aluminum. This is because, according to the philosopher David Wiggins, there are two classifications of facts. There are non-anthropocentric facts. These are truths that are true regardless of the kinds of creatures we are, regardless of whether or not we ever evolved or existed. 2 + 2 = 4 is a non-anthropocentric fact. So are the earlier facts I mentioned about Earth and electricity. And then there are anthropocentric facts. These are facts that are true only because of the kinds of creatures we are. So it's not moral relativism, but it is relative to human beings, how we are composed, how our human nature causes us to interact with one another, how we evolved, etc., how our nature developed in us a language instinct, to quote Steven Pinker. Moral relativism, on the other hand, would mean that something is true relative to a particular culture, time, place, geographical locale, regime, whatever. With moral relativism, whatever is right or wrong because that culture says it is, because that culture believes it to be, right? It's the attitude, moral relativism is the attitude, who are we to say? Who are we to say that it's wrong what they do in, I don't know, pick your country, Iran? We don't belong to that culture. It would be presumptuous of us to judge. That's moral relativism. And the problem with moral relativism is that there's nothing stopping a culture from saying that horrible things are okay, that Sharia law is okay, because it's their culture after all, and they've decided it's right. There is nothing stopping a culture from saying Nazism is okay because it's their culture, right? So moral relativism is icky. And if you're a moral relativist, you have to ask the question to this person, well, do you have the tools now, given your ethical system, do you have the tools at your disposal to criticize Nazi Germany and say that Nazi Germany is evil, which it is? Well, the moral relativist really can't say that, because there you had a culture who thought that abhorrent things were right. And that's all you need for the moral relativist. It's relative to whatever they think and whatever they do in their culture. Here's the big difference between moral relativism and my moral realist conception of anthropocentric truth. It doesn't matter to me that a culture says it's right. Preventing women from driving, hanging gays from cranes, sending Jews to gas chambers is objectively wrong. In the same way that it is objectively unhealthy for you to shoot up heroin because of the kind of creature that you are, right? Heroin is deadly. It's very easy to OD. It's extremely addictive, right? We're wired in such a way that heroin, if you want to get into natural law theory, we can get into natural law theory. Heroin, if it's widely used in a culture, is going to destroy that culture. In the same way that it is objectively unhealthy for you to eat every meal at McDonald's for your entire life because it's unhealthy and bad for you and you will die earlier, it is also then wrong for other cultures to hold those values that I mentioned earlier and to do those things to other human beings because of the kinds of creatures that we all are. Moral truths are anthropocentric truths, right? The practices of the antebellum South or Nazi Germany or Maoist China, those practices are barbaric, they're uncivilized, and they go against our human nature and what is good for human beings. They violate the laws of nature. They violate the natural law, to cite John Locke and the founders. This line of thinking, of course, is not original. All of this is in line with Aristotle, it's in line with Kant, it's in line with natural rights theory and natural law theory, but it seems as if we've forgotten these ideas. And that's what this podcast is all about. So anyways, back to the discussion between Socrates and Euthyphro. Rather than find a better definition, rather than grapple with his challenge, Euthyphro gets frustrated. He leaves in a huff. He's frustrated by Socrates' questioning. And that's kind of how the dialogue goes, is that Plato raises this extremely important question, this Euthyphro dilemma. And Euthyphro himself comes to be frustrated by his limited understanding of how things are. Okay, so now we get to the next dialogue, which is Plato's Apology. The Apology is an account of the speech Socrates makes at the trial, in which he is charged with not recognizing the gods that the state recognizes, inventing new deities, corrupting the youth of Athens. That's why they put him on trial. So much for free speech. Interestingly enough, I want to say, given the title, Socrates' speech here in court is by no means an actual apology in the sense that we usually think of the word apology, which would mean saying that you're sorry for something. The name of the dialogue, the apology, derives from the Greek apologia, which translates as defense or a speech made in defense. And so in the apology, Socrates attempts to defend himself and his conduct rather than apologizing for it. Socrates in court speaks in a very plain conversational manner. He explains that he has no experience with the law courts and that he will instead speak in the manner to which he is accustomed, with honesty and directness. Okay, so already you can see Socrates' disarming manner. He says that he has no experience with the law courts and that he's kind of ignorant. This is what he does in all of his dialogues. He says, quote, "I must beg of you to grant me one favor, which is this. If you hear me using the same words in my defense, which I have been in the habit of using, and which most of you may have heard in the agora and at the tables of money changers or anywhere else, I would ask you not to be surprised at this and not to interrupt me. For I am more than 70 years of age, and this is the first time that I have ever appeared in a court of law, and I am quite a stranger to the ways of the place. And therefore I would have you regard me as if I were really a stranger, whom you would excuse if he spoke in his native tongue, and after the fashion of his country. That, I think, is not an unfair request. Never mind the manner, which may or may not be good, but think only of the justice of my cause, and give heed to that. Let the jury decide with their virtue, arete, and let the speaker speak truly." Okay, so it's already Socrates is flexing his logical muscles. Socrates is saying, I know that people are tempted to commit ad hominem. Please do not decide my case on the basis of whether I am controversial or not, on the basis of the fact of the way I speak, whether or not you like my personality. Look at the facts of the case. Decide with your own minds. Never mind the manner. My manner, I might be uncouth. I'm not a fancy pants like you. I may be uncouth, right? But don't judge my case on that. Think only of the justice of my cause and give heed to the facts of the case, okay? And let the speaker speak truly. Socrates says that he's aware of the rumors that are spreading about him. He's aware of the charges that have been put forth. He knows what people have been saying about him. I'll quote Socrates here. He says to the court, "What do the slanderers say?" I'll sum up their words in an affidavit. "Socrates does nothing that is just. He's a curious person who searches into things under the earth and in the sky, and he makes the worse appear the better cause, and he teaches the aforesaid doctrines to others. That is the nature of the accusation. And that is what you have seen yourselves in the comedy of Aristophanes, who has introduced a man whom he calls Socrates, going about and saying that he can walk in the air and talking a deal of nonsense concerning matters of which I do not pretend to know either much or little. Not that I mean to say anything disparaging of anyone who is wise, sophos, about natural philosophy. I should be very sorry if Meletes could lay that to my charge. But the simple truth is, O Athenians, is that I have nothing to do with these studies." So he is basically characterizing the spurious charges against him. People are treating him as if he's some sort of witch running around and teaching people these unnatural ways, reading things in the chicken entrails, reading things in the sky, and corrupting the youth. Socrates then explains that his behavior stems from a prophecy by the oracle at Delphi, which claimed that he was the wisest of all men. Socrates says, quote, "When I heard the answer, I said to myself, what can the god mean? And what is the interpretation of this riddle, this enigma? For I know that I have no wisdom, Sophia, small or great. What can he mean when he says that I am the wisest, most sophos, of men? And yet he's a god and cannot lie. That would be against his nature. So after a long consideration, I at last thought of a method of trying the question. I reflected that if I could only find a man more sophos than myself, more wise than myself, then I might go to the god with a refutation of the oracle in my hand. I should say to him, here is a man who is more sophos than I am, but you said I was the most sophos. So accordingly, I went to one who had the reputation of being wise and observed him. And the result was as follows. When I began to talk with him, I could not help thinking that he was not really wise, although he was thought so by many and more still by himself. I went and tried to explain to him that he thought himself sophos, but was not really sophos, and the consequence was that he hated me, and his enmity was shared by several who were present and heard me. So I left him, saying to myself as I went away, well, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. In this latter particular, then, I seem to be slightly more sophos than him. Then I went to another who had still higher philosophical pretensions, and my conclusion was exactly the same. I made another enemy of him, and of many others besides him. After this, I went to one man after another, being not unconscious of the enmity which I had provoked, and I lamented and feared this. But necessity was laid upon me. The word of God I thought ought to be considered first, and I said to myself, go I must to all who appear to know and find out the meaning of the oracle. And I swear to you, Athenians, by the dog I swear, for I must tell you the truth, the result of my mission was just this. I found that the men in most repute were all but the most foolish, and that some inferior men were really wiser and better. When I left the politicians, I went to the poets, tragic, dithyrambic, and all sorts, and there I said to myself, you will be detected. Now you will find out that you are more ignorant than they are. Accordingly, I took them some of the most elaborate passages in their own writings and asked what was the meaning of them, thinking that they would teach me something. I must say that there is hardly a person present who would not have talked better about their poetry than they did themselves. That showed me in an instant that not by wisdom do poets write poetry, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners or soothsayers, who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them. And the poets appeared to me to be much in the same case. And I further observed that upon the strength of their poetry, they believed themselves to be the most sophos of men in other things in which they were not sophos. So I departed, conceiving myself to be superior to them for the same reason that I was superior to the politicians. And here Socrates is obviously talking about the fact that he's saying that he's superior to them because Socrates knows that he knows nothing, right? There is one thing that I know, and that is that I know nothing. Socrates is the only one around who seems to be aware of his own ignorance, and that, paradoxically, is what seems to make him the wisest of all. So what do we have in all of this? Socrates goes to an oracle. The oracle, through the gods, tells Socrates that Socrates is the wisest of all men. And Socrates says, "Oh, this can't be the case. I mean, I don't want to challenge the knowledge of the all-knowing gods, but I do want to find out what's going on. Why would the gods say this about me when I feel like I know nothing? How could I be the wisest person?" So Socrates first approaches the politicians, and the politicians think they're wise and know everything. But really, the politicians know only how to fool other people and even themselves into thinking that they're wise. So they're delusional and they're kind of con men. That is the politician's skill, is convincing other people to see that illusion. Politicians are basically smooth-talking con men. So then Socrates approaches the poets. And the poets see they're fantastic and very talented, but they're not really wise. They're more like diviners, Socrates says. The poets, the musicians, the painters, the dancers of the world, these are inspired creators. They have the ability to translate their feelings, their deepest, most profound emotions into art that really moves people. But even they themselves don't always fully understand what they've even created. This impulse, by the way, is what really gives rise to Romanticism. Wordsworth, in his preface to Lyrical Ballads, a work that he published with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Wordsworth describes poetry as the, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. So according to Wordsworth, and this was in his younger days, the purpose of the poet is to take these spontaneous feelings, these primal energies, and to sit down and translate them and channel them into poetry. So this is pathos, it's feeling. And here I think Plato is really getting at something important about the nature of creativity. He's saying that when inspired creators create art, whether it's poetry, music, literature, visual arts, what have you, there's a sense in which they themselves are not coming up with the ideas. Often the first question that fans will ask an artist, a musician, a novelist is, where do you come up with your ideas? Where do you get your ideas? And if you've ever watched one of these interviews, typically, this is what I've found, the artist says, I don't know. I don't know where I get my ideas actually. They just come to me. And this is oftentimes right. There's a sense in which the artist is not so much originating the ideas as receiving them, right? And then the next question to ask is, well, where are they coming from? Receiving them from whom? And so this is where the idea of the muse comes in, this god that supplies artists with ideas. And then you could say the artist then is the one who is best at hearing this muse and transcribing what the muse offers them. Artists, that is, have a kind of way of being open with their feelings. They have a way of receiving certain ideas and just kind of not getting in the way of them, right, of that transmission. This is why oftentimes philosophers and literary critics don't make good novelists. They're too analytical, right? They can't shut their reasoning minds down and allow their intuition to work free. But Socrates seems to be saying that while artists may be very good at what they do, they may be good at translating their feelings, following their intuitions, they're not so much wise as they are soothsayers. It's a different kind of genius, and you can certainly look at the way artists often behave and live to understand why Socrates is saying artists may be talented, but they're not so much wise. So Socrates continues, at last, and he's on this search to find anyone who's going to be wiser than him, right? And he's not having any luck. At last, Socrates says, I went to the artisans, for I was conscious that I knew nothing at all, as I must say, and I was sure that they knew many fine things. And in this I was not mistaken, for they did know many things of which I was ignorant. And in this they certainly were more sophos than I was. Here, Plato seems to be distinguishing narrow intelligence, that is, skill at some narrow activity, skill at some craft, kind of savantry. In artificial intelligence, they call this narrow AI, narrow artificial intelligence versus general artificial intelligence. So Plato seems to be distinguishing narrow intelligence with real wisdom. The artisans are good at what they do, just like the poets. They're good at their craft. But do they have real wisdom? He continues, quote, but I observed that even the good artisans fell into the same error, hamartia, as the poets, because they were good workmen. Because they were good workmen, they thought that they also knew all sorts of high matters, and this defect in them overshadowed their Sophia. Therefore, I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I would like to be as I was, neither having their knowledge nor their ignorance, or whether I would like to have both. And I made an answer to myself and the oracle that I was better off as I was. Unquote. So recognizing his ignorance there in most worldly affairs, Socrates concludes that he must be wiser than other men only in that he knows nothing. In order to spread this peculiar wisdom, Socrates explains that, to the court that he considered it his duty to question supposed wise men. So you guys are wondering why I've been walking around Athens challenging people, engaging in the Socratic method, debating people, and teaching the youth in using Socratic discussion. And you guys are charging me with a crime for that. But all I was really trying to do is that I considered it my duty to question those people that think that they're wise men and to expose their false wisdom as ignorance. I'm just asking questions to show these people who think that they're wise that they really aren't as wise as they think. What's wrong with bringing people down to earth? And so Socrates says, look, I'm aware that these activities have earned me much admiration amongst the youth of Athens and much hatred and anger from the people that I embarrassed. I'm aware that that's going to happen. The young people are going to be impressed with me, and the people who I brought into a state of aporia, they are going to be angry at me. People who lose arguments will frequently get angry, right? I'm aware of that. But Socrates basically says their contempt should not be the reason that I am put on trial. Then Socrates proceeds to interrogate Meletus, the man who is primarily responsible for bringing him before the jury. This here, I would say, is the only instance in the Apology of the kind of cross-examination that's so central to the Platonic dialogues, though I would say that this conversation with Meletus is a poor example of the Socratic method, because Socrates is kind of angry and it seems more directed toward embarrassing him than arriving at the truth. In one famous passage in the Apology, Socrates likens himself to a gadfly stinging the lazy horse, which is the Athenian state, right? So you guys are just breezing through life. You are complacent, and you are self-satisfied with your thin knowledge of things. You're not wise. You think you're wise, and you're satisfied with that on your high horse. And so Socrates says, your city basically needs a gadfly. Every civilization needs a philosopher who will ask the hard questions, who isn't afraid to ask the hard questions. Without a philosopher like him, Socrates claims, the state is liable to drift into a deep sleep. But through his influence, through the influence of philosophers that are willing to ask hard questions, irritating as it may be to some, a state can be wakened into productive and virtuous action. It may be deemed unpopular or pretentious or silly to ask certain questions, big life questions. Some questions don't seem very practical or may be considered taboo or inappropriate in society. But all free societies need philosophers, people who aren't afraid to ask these sorts of big questions. You see this in our society as well. There's a lot of tension in our society. The people running our society are convinced that they are elite experts, that they know how to run our lives, that they are wise philosopher kings. And it is increasingly becoming the case that when you ask difficult questions that the ruling class doesn't like you to ask, you're increasingly being hauled up on charges the same way that Socrates is being hauled up on charges. It's the cancel culture, right? Is that you question something that does not toe the party line. You question something that the mainstream considers to be a settled fact, even though no one's asked the right questions or no one's asked the hard questions. Take a question like immigration. I would consider myself to be someone very friendly to the idea of legal immigration, and even in some cases more immigration. But we have to have laws, and to even ask questions about what's happening at our border, even to ask questions about, can you really have both a welfare state and open borders, right? And what is catch and release? Are we just releasing people into the interior of the country? How many people show up for their trial? If you even ask just honest, open-minded questions, and maybe you decide in the end to favor a more open borders approach, I don't know. But even asking the question in our culture gets you in trouble. There are so many of these hot button topics, whether it's gender or race or taxation or the role of government, how limited should government be, right? Or abortion or anything like that. Any question, and you could come down on either side. I know many of my listeners do. A true philosopher is someone who isn't afraid to talk about it and isn't afraid to challenge those in power and ask the questions that need to be asked. So in the end, Socrates is found guilty by a narrow margin and is asked to propose a penalty. Socrates jokingly suggests that what he really deserves is to be honored with a great meal for being such a service to the state. I'm keeping you guys on your toes. I'm making it so that your state does not become decadent, so that you're not becoming lazy in your sort of elite consensus solutions to the problems that we face. I'm asking hard questions that you have to deal with, whether you like it or not. And so you should really be rewarding me, not punishing me. In the end, they offer him an exile of 10 years, what they called ostracism in ancient Greece. But Socrates rejects both prison time and exile. No, I'm not going to do a temporary stint in jail. No, I am not going to be exiled. I'm 70 years old. I've lived here all of my life. And so Socrates says, look, I'll pay a fine. Let's put this behind us. But when the jury rejects his suggestion and sentences him then to death for both his crimes, his insubordination, all of that, Socrates stoically accepts the verdict and says bravely that no one but the gods know what happens after death. And so it will be foolish to fear what one does not know. And this is where we come back to that theme of Socrates only knowing that he knows nothing. He's saying, in fact, I don't know what happens after death, so it would be irrational for me to be afraid of that. And you can cancel me, you can kill me, but you're not going to kill me in spirit. I am happy to drink your hemlock. He also warns the jurymen who voted against him that in silencing their critic, rather than listening to him, they have harmed themselves much more than they have harmed him. Just brilliant, brilliant stuff. Would that our philosophers today in our culture had such courage and clarity of thought and such resolve. Okay, so what we've just explored is such an important moment in the history of philosophy. If you ever get the chance, I would recommend that all of my listeners pick up Will Durant's The Story of Philosophy. Will Durant was this great writer who wrote a bunch of books with his wife Ariel, really wise thinker and fantastic writer. His most impressive achievement is perhaps his 11-volume book, The Story of Civilization. I've read a couple of those, but certainly not the whole thing. Here's Will Durant's summary of the trial and death of Socrates from The Story of Philosophy. And here we're kind of going from the Apology and then switching over to Plato's Crito, to the Crito. And this is a passage from Will Durant's The Story of Philosophy. We are privileged to read for ourselves that simple and courageous, if not legendary, apology or defense in which the first martyr of philosophy proclaimed the rights and necessity of free thought, upheld his value to the state, and refused to beg for mercy from the crowd, whom he had always contemned. They had the power to pardon him. He disdained to make the appeal. It was a singular confirmation of his theories that the judges should wish to let him go, while the angry crowd voted for his death. Had he not denied the gods? Woe to him who teaches men faster than they can learn. So they decreed that he should drink the hemlock. His friends came to his prison and offered him an easy escape. They had bribed all the officials who stood between him and liberty. He refused. He was 70 years old now. Perhaps he thought it was time for him to die, and that he could never again die so usefully. And here Will Durant is talking about the fact that his friends actually bribed the guards and said, Socrates, look, man, I know you're being brave and stuff, but we can help you escape. We can set you free. We bribed the guards. The state doesn't want to have to put you to death, right? It looks bad. It looks petty. It looks small on their part. And we could just say that the dastardly criminal escaped from prison, and then the state's better off. They didn't have to kill you and make a martyr of you, and you're better off because you can live your life. You can live your life. Okay, back to Will Durant's Story of Philosophy. Be of good cheer, Socrates told his sorrowing friends, and say that you are burying my body only. When he had spoken these words, says Plato, in one of the great passages of the world's literature, and this is from the Crito, he arose and went into the bath chamber with Crito, who bade us wait. And we waited, talking and thinking of the greatness of our sorrow. He was like a father of whom we were being bereaved, and we were about to pass the rest of our lives as orphans. At this point, Will Durant is talking about the Crito. So this is a dialogue, obviously written by Plato, and it's when Socrates is having a conversation with Crito and his other friends in prison who are trying to get him to escape, and he's saying, "No, I'm going to drink the hemlock." Be of good cheer, Socrates told his sorrowing friends, and say that you are burying my body only. When he had spoken these words, says Plato in one of the great passages of the world's literature, he arose and went into the bath chamber with Crito, who bade us wait, and we waited, talking and thinking of the greatness of our sorrow. He was like a father whom we were being bereaved, and we were about to pass the rest of our lives as orphans. Now the hour of sunset was near, for a good deal of time had passed while he was within. When he came out, he sat down with us again, but not so much was said. Soon the jailer entered and stood by him, saying, "To you, Socrates," even the jailer did not want Socrates to die, "to you, Socrates, whom I know to be the noblest and gentlest and best of all who ever came to this place, I will not impute the angry feelings of other men who rage and swear at me when, in obedience to the authorities, I bid them drink the poison. Indeed, I am sure that you will not be angry with me, for others, as you are aware, and not I, are the guilty cause." And so this prison guard here is saying, "Look, please don't be mad at me, Socrates. I idolize you. Don't kill the messenger. I'm just giving you the hemlock because I'm supposed to. And so fare you well, and try to bear lightly what must needs be. You know my errand." Then bursting into tears, he turned away and went out. Socrates looked at him and said, "I return your good wishes, and will do as you bid." Then turning to us, he said, "How charming the man is! Since I have been in prison, he has always been coming to see me, and now see how generously he sorrows for me. But we must do as he says, Crito. Let the cup be brought if the poison is prepared. If not, let the attendant prepare some." "Yet," said Crito, "the sun is still upon the hilltops, and many a one has taken the draught late, and after the announcement has been made to him, he has eaten and drunk and indulged in sensual delights. Do not hasten, then. There's still time." Socrates said, "Yes, Crito, and they of whom you speak are right in doing thus, for they think that they will gain by the delay. But I am right in not doing thus, for I do not think that I should gain anything by drinking the poison a little later. I should be sparing and saving a life which is already gone. I could only laugh at myself for this. Please, then, do as I say, and not to refuse me." Crito, when he heard this, made a sign to the servant, and the servant went in and remained for some time, and then returned with the jailer carrying the cup of poison. Socrates said, "You, my good friend, who are experienced in these matters, shall give me directions on how I am to proceed." The man answered, "You have only to walk about until your legs are heavy, and then to lie down, and the poison will act." At the same time he handed the cup to Socrates, who in the easiest and gentlest manner, without the least fear or change of color or feature, looking at the man with all his eyes as his manner was, took the cup and said, "What do you say about making a libation out of this cup to any god? May I or not?" The man answered, "We only prepare, Socrates, just so much as we deem enough." "I understand," he said. "Yet I may and must pray to the gods to prosper my journey from this to the other world. May this, then, which is my prayer, be granted to me." Then, holding the cup to his lips quite readily and cheerfully, Socrates drank the poison. And Durant goes on, "Hitherto most of us had been able to control our sorrow, but now when we saw him drinking, and saw too that he had finished the draught, we could no longer forbear, and in spite of myself, my own tears were flowing fast, so that I covered my face and wept over myself, for certainly I was not weeping over him, but at the thought of my own calamity, and having lost such a companion. Nor was I the first, for Crito, when he found himself unable to restrain his tears, had got up and moved away, and I followed. And at that moment, Apollodorus, who had been weeping all the time, broke out into a loud cry which made cowards of us all. Socrates alone remained in his calmness. "What is this strange outcry?" he said. "I sent the women mainly in order that they might not offend this way, for I have heard that a man should die in peace. Be quiet, then, and have some patience." When we heard that, we were ashamed and restrained our tears. And Socrates walked about until, as he said, his legs began to fail. And then he lay on his back, according to the directions, and the man who gave him the poison now and then looked at his feet and legs. And after a while he pressed his foot hard and asked him if he could feel. And Socrates said no, and then his leg, and so upward and upwards, and showed us that he was cold and stiff. And then Socrates felt them himself and said, "When the poison reaches the heart, that will be the end." He was beginning to grow cold about the groin when he uncovered his face, for he had covered himself up, and said, and these were his last words, "Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay my debt?" "The debt shall be paid," said Crito, Is there anything else? And there was no answer to this question. But in a minute or two, a movement was heard, and the attendant uncovered him. His eyes were set, and Crito closed his eyes and mouth. And such was the end of our friend, whom I may truly call the wisest, the justest, and the best of all the men whom I have ever known. So the purpose of this dialogue, the Crito, that Will Durant here is beautifully summarizing. The point is that you have Socrates in jail awaiting death. His friends bust in and they're like, look, dude, you can escape. We've bribed these guards. We can arrange this. You're a huge deal. We cannot just let you die like this. And so I just want to take you through some of the arguments here, because Crito makes several appeals to Socrates, arguing that Socrates should break the laws of Athens and escape. Because I think this argument is a really important one in the history of philosophy, and it really does introduce us to one way of thinking about the individual and the individual's responsibility to the state. And I think it really contrasts with some philosophies that you see later on, things like civil disobedience and Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail and that sort of thing. And so Socrates is going to kind of make the opposite argument as them. So just keep in mind here, Crito is in there and he feels it's his job to persuade Socrates to escape. We love you. We need you. We want you to escape. You could still live out your days in some other city. They won't come looking for you. Don't worry about it. Please escape. Do us this honor. And so let's go through these arguments. First of all, says Socrates' friend and student Crito. And here I'm quoting again from the online version of the Crito. First of all, quote, I shall lose a friend whom I can never possibly replace. So the first argument that Crito makes to Socrates is a kind of selfish one. He says, I'm selfishly worried that I will lose a good friend. And so that in itself is one reason that you should escape from prison, because you're one of my good friends. I don't want to lose you as a mentor and as a friend, and you'll be harming us if you leave us, if you let the state execute you by forcing you to drink the hemlock. And then Crito goes on, many people besides, and this is a quote here, many people who don't know you and me very well will be sure to think that I let you down because I could have saved you if I had been willing to spend the money. What could be more contemptible than to get a name for thinking more of money than of your friends? Most people will never believe that it was you who refused to leave this place, although we tried our hardest to persuade you. So Crito's second argument is kind of another selfish one. Crito says that he's afraid that his reputation will be harmed too. So if you stay in this prison cell and don't escape as we're asking you to, people will think we didn't do everything that was in our power to get you out of prison, that we didn't pay enough to bribe the guards, that our money was worth more to us than our friend, than you, Socrates. People won't know that you yourself chose to stay in jail. The mob will turn against me. They'll think I'm a cheapskate and that it's my fault that you didn't escape. So again, Crito's second argument. And so the brilliant thing about Crito as a dialogue is Socrates is literally about to die. And as he's about to die, you get another Socratic dialogue. And so he's literally debating up until the moment of his death. Crito and Socrates are debating whether or not it is just to disobey your state and escape from prison and basically evade the justice of the state of Athens. Is that a moral thing to do? Is it okay to break some laws, right? Even if, of course, Socrates feels like his penalty is unjust. Socrates does think it's unjust. He doesn't think he did anything wrong. So he does think it's unjust that he's being put to death. But the question at the heart of this dialogue is going to be, even though it seems like this is an immoral law, Socrates is going to make the argument, we have a duty to follow the laws of our state. And if we don't agree with them, then we should change them. But we do have a duty to follow the laws of our state. And Crito is saying, no, you should escape. These are unfair laws, right? And so now you're getting to understand a little bit about why I said earlier that you get the very opposite argument in someone like Thoreau with civil disobedience, or Martin Luther King Jr., who says, the fact that something's law doesn't mean you should follow it. The question is does the law square with the moral law? Does the law respect a person's natural rights? So Socrates responds that, look, you're so concerned with what other people are going to think of you. Socrates says, quote, serious thinkers have always held some such view that some of the opinions which people should entertain should be respected and others should not. One should regard the good ones and not the bad. Should the disciple in gymnastics attend to the praise and blame and opinion of every man, or only of one man only, his trainer? We must not regard what the many say of us, but what he, the one man who has the understanding of just and unjust, will say, and what the truth will say. And therefore, you begin in error when you suggest that we should regard the opinion of the many about what is just and unjust, good and evil, honorable and dishonorable. And then he says, I know, some will say, but the many can kill us. They're the mob. They can kill us. And to this, Socrates says, it's not life, but a good life that is to be chiefly valued. Okay. And this is actually getting back to a little bit of this goes some way to explaining why Socrates and therefore Plato did not believe that democracy was actually just, is that it doesn't matter if the masses want to run the state in X, Y, or Z fashion. What matters is that the most wise, the best rulers, the most moral people, the philosopher kings, the experts, what's most important is what they say we should do. Who cares what someone who doesn't know, who cares how the poets want to run the state? Who cares how the artisans want to run the state? We don't have to listen to the mob, but we have to listen to the people who are wisest and know best. And so the argument Socrates is making here is that the opinion of the majority is not the most important opinion. A thing is true whether or not the majority believes it to be so. And so Crito, he's saying, stop using argument ad populum. And yet at the same time, you can see that Socrates is kind of wading into the territory of appeal to authority fallacy when he suggests that you should pay attention to the praise and criticism given by qualified persons, that experts necessarily know more than the common person, right? So Crito makes another argument. He says, quote, I hope that you are not worried about the possible effects on me and the rest of your friends, and thinking that if you escape, we shall get in trouble with informers for having helped you get away and have to forfeit all of our property or pay an enormous fine or even incur some further punishment. Dismiss that altogether, Crito says. So the third argument that Crito makes is he's saying to Socrates that if you're refusing to escape prison because you're worried about us getting in trouble, don't think about that another second. Don't even worry about it. The informers are not going to rat because it's super easy and cheap to pay them off. And plus, they are totally willing to run the risk for you, Socrates. So if your hesitancy is born of the fact that you're actually worried about what's going to happen to us, stop worrying, okay? And then Crito makes another argument. He says, how can I get Socrates to escape with me here? He says, keep in mind, quote, you are letting your sons down too. You have it in your power to escape from prison and to finish their bringing up and education. And instead of that, you are proposing to go off and desert them. And what sort of chance in the world are they likely to get? The sort of thing that usually happens to orphans when they lose their parents, unquote. So Crito's sort of fourth argument is that Socrates has a responsibility to his children. As their father, it's Socrates' responsibility to see that his children are brought up well and educated. And he can't do that if he's dead or rotting away in some prison. And so he's kind of appealing to Socrates' belief that pursuing goodness is how one ought to lead their life. And he's basically saying, well, a good man would see that his children are cared for. So he's kind of starting to use Socrates' logic. He's saying it isn't about you. How about your responsibility towards raising your children? Okay. And so the next argument that Crito makes is, he says, quote, you are throwing your life away when you might save it. You are doing your best to treat yourself in the exact same way as your enemies did, or as your enemies would when they wanted to kill you. So he's basically saying, Here's another argument, Socrates. By consenting to death at the hands of your enemy when you might escape, you're no better than your enemy. So what were you doing in there defending yourself against the court and saying that they are wrong when you are just going to help them enact these evils that you claim they're enacting? You're aiding and abetting them. That makes you no better than your enemy. Okay? So here's how Socrates responds. Socrates makes a number of arguments. He says, quote, now that this fortune has come upon me, I cannot put away the reasons which I have before given, the principles which I have hitherto honored and revered. I still honor those. And unless we can find other and better principles on the instant, I am certain not to agree with you. Not even if the power of the multitude could inflict many more imprisonments, confiscations, deaths, frightening us like children with hobgoblin terrors. But what will be the fairest way of considering the question? Death or any other calamity which may ensue on my remaining here must not be allowed to enter into the calculation. So what he's saying is, my duty as a philosopher is to use reason. Okay, that is all. We cannot let the threat of death, we cannot let fears, imprisonments, confiscations, threats of death dictate our morality, dictate our decisions. We must use our reason and not let these things intimidate reason. So stop bringing up the fact that I'm working on the side of my enemy by accepting their punishment. I have to decide whether it's right for me, Socrates, to violate the laws of Athens. Okay? You're focusing all on this punishment I'm facing. I'm in this prison cell. I'm about to be put to death. All right? I'm not going to be cowed by this death sentence into changing my morality. I've always held by this, that we should follow the laws of Athens.